I'm live! And Gia is running away from the camera because that's just what she does. She's had her camera time today. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, you are here at Gentle Reads in the studio at Fairport Harbor Public Library. And we're on chapter 8, and I can't wait to find out what's for dinner. Come and sit down, Naomi called out as Cheryl entered the kitchen. Seth and the boys were already standing next to the table. They must have come in the back door. This was the first time Cheryl had seen the entire family gathered together in one place. Please, Cheryl, you are our guest. Will you sit here? Naomi pointed to a chair on one side of the table. Cheryl sat down, feeling a little uncomfortable as the family waited for her. But as soon as she slipped into her seat, everyone else took their place at the table. Naomi sat at one end and Seth at the other. Levi, Caleb, and Eli were across from her on one side of the large table, and the girls, Elizabeth and Esther, were seated on the other side of her. On either side of her, excuse me. Cheryl nodded at Eli, and he smiled at her. There was silence at the table, and Cheryl looked at Seth. A rather stern-looking man with a full beard, he was hard to read. He had endured the death of a wife and the loss of a daughter who had turned her back on the Amish ways that were so important to him. These disappointments must surely have changed him in some way. Let us pray, he said. Cheryl bowed her head with the rest of the family and waited for Seth to speak, but there was only silence. She opened one eye to observe the family. Were they waiting for her to pray? Was she committing some kind of Amish faux pas? Not sure what to do, she just sat there. Suddenly, all at once, Seth exhaled and raised his head, followed by the rest of the family. Then he reached out for the platter of fried chicken. This looks good enough to eat, wife, he said. Cheryl caught the twinkle in his eye and felt a little more relaxed. No one seemed to be the least bit uncomfortable. Obviously, the Amish like to pray silently, something she wished her aunt would have shared with her. Someday, her discomfort might make a humorous story, but tonight, Cheryl was just relieved she hadn't launched into a prayer and embarrassed herself. The family exchanged small talk about their day as each bowl or plate was passed around the table. It wasn't long until Cheryl's plate was full. There was crispy fried chicken, fluffy mashed potatoes, and thick gravy swimming with pieces of chicken. She also spooned small helpings of creamed spinach, fried okra, and sliced tomatoes on the very small empty spots on her plate. Cheryl was certain all the vegetables had come from Naomi's garden. When the biscuits came by, she took one and put it on a smaller plate next to her larger one. Then came butter and strawberry jam. By the time Cheryl had helped herself to everything on the table, she was shocked by how much food was in front of her. Would she ever be able to eat it all? She watched the rest of the family attack their food with gusto. It was a wonder they all stayed so slim. If she ate as much as they seemed to, Cheryl would have to run 5 miles a day to work off the excess weight. Do you not like your food, Cheryl? She looked up to see Naomi staring at her. It's wonderful, she replied. I'm just wondering if my eyes were bigger than my stomach. Naomi laughed, and the rest of the family joined in. The Amish take their meals very seriously, Levi said. Perhaps you have heard this problem. Let's try that again. Perhaps you have heard this proverb. The family that eats together grows together. Levi Miller, Naomi said, you know that is not how it goes. She looks at Cheryl, a hint of a smile, playing at the corners of her mouth. The saying is, the family that works together grows together. I am afraid my son likes to make jokes. Levi winked at Cheryl. But, ma'am, is it not true that a family that eats a lot will certainly grow fat together? Naomi broke out in laughter, and her family joined in. Well, I'll do the best I can, Cheryl said, but if I ate like this every night, I'd have to be rolled to work each day. Naomi giggled. I doubt that will happen. Amish food will only make you strong and healthy. Ain't so, husband? Seth smiled at her. Is so, wife. He turned his attention to Cheryl. Naomi tells me you have a problem and would like advice. After dinner, we will go into the living room and talk. I am hopeful we can assist you. I am sorry bad things have happened to you in our town. It is usually very quiet here. Cheryl put down her fork. Thank you, Seth. I'm sure that's true. I just need to be certain I don't make a mistake. The last thing I want is to do anything that will bring harm to Sugar Creek. He nodded. We will discuss it, away from the table. Cheryl gulped. Had she offended him? It was hard to get a handle on him. She looked to Naomi, who smiled at her reassuringly. So, Cheryl, did you see our corn maze on the way to the house? Cheryl smiled. Yes, in fact, I stopped to look at the petting zoo and the maze. Eli was gracious enough to take me through the zoo. It was wonderful. I didn't have time to visit the maze, but I must say that it looks much different than the maze next door to the shop. Yours is so beautiful and professional looking. One of these days, I will run over during the day and go through it. You will be our guest, Seth said. We maintain the maze and make certain our visitors enjoy their visit. We do not leave them to their own devices and allow our corn to mold. Seth, Naomi said quietly, let us not speak ill of others. We need to believe the best of everyone. Seth's bushy eyebrows shot up, and Cheryl wondered if he would rebuke his wife for her gentle reprimand. But instead he said, yeah, you are right, wife. Thank you. Cheryl asked the family some questions about their petting zoo and was happy to hear that, as Eli had told her, they were very careful with the animals, not allowing them to be mistreated. Every animal was let out into larger pens in the evening so they could get extra and loved all their animals. Finally, the dinner plates were cleared away. Naomi and Esther scooped pieces of pie onto dessert plates and passed one out to each person. Cheryl had never seen pie like this before. It is caramel pie, Caleb said, looking at Cheryl. Ma'am makes the best caramel pie in the county. Cheryl was struck by how much Caleb looked like his brother Levi. Although Caleb was a few years younger, the men could be twins. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Ah, Caleb, Naomi said, looking embarrassed. Unless you have tasted every piece of caramel pie in the county, you do not know if mine is the best. Seth grunted. I have tasted a lot of pie, wife, and yours is always the best. I am not too proud to say I am married to the best cook in Ohio. Naomi blushed. Now, husband, you will make Cheryl think I am arrogant. Levi laughed out loud. I do not believe anyone will ever call you arrogant, ma'am. You are the most humble person I know. Shh! Naomi hissed at her stepson. Fill your mouth with pie instead of words. The children giggled as they dug into their dessert. Cheryl was just so full she couldn't see how she was going to be able to swallow another bite. But the taste of the gooey, rich pie drove her to eat every last crumb. After pouring coffee for the adults, Seth announced it was time to go to the living room. While the younger children began to clear the table, Seth nodded at Cheryl to follow him. As they entered the other room, Cheryl noticed that only Seth, Levi, and Naomi joined her. The rest of the family stayed in the kitchen. After clearing the table, the children have evening chores, Naomi explained. Besides, we have decided we will not share this situation with them. We do not want them to worry. Seth added another log to the fireplace, and Naomi lit 2 hurricane lamps in the room. The subtle light created a wonderful, cozy atmosphere. Cheryl remembered wondering how her aunt could possibly live without electricity in Papua New Guinea, yet the Amish did it, and it certainly didn't seem like a hardship to them. Levi took the small place on the hearth where he'd been before dinner. Cheryl sat in a rocking chair near the fire. There was a chill in the air, and the fire warmed her. Seth and Naomi were next to each other on the couch. Will you explain to us what your concerns are, Cheryl? Seth said. Naomi has told me a little. I would like to hear from you. Feeling a little nervous, Cheryl told him everything that had happened, beginning with her visit to the maze up until the note she'd found earlier in the day. She reached over and picked up her purse, pulling the note out. Before she could hand it to Seth, Levi jumped up and took the piece of paper from her, saving her from having to get up. Once Levi delivered it to his father, he went back to his place on the hearth and sat down. Seth quickly read the note and frowned. Then he put it on the coffee table in front of him. You think this man, this Jerry, is still in town? Cheryl shrugged. That's just it. I have no idea. All I have is the memory of a voice and Abby's description, which helps very little. And this Abby cannot help you find her husband because she's afraid. Cheryl nodded. She's threatened to leave town, but Rachel and Janie have asked her to stay. They feel it's better to deal with the situation now while she's in a place where she has friends. And I agree with them. Cheryl, Levi said, have you contacted the police? It seems this would be an appropriate response. I agree, said Seth. I have met Chief Twitchell, and I find him to be a decent man. Abby asked me not to do that, Cheryl said. I don't really have anything to go on, a phone conversation, a note, and a vague description. Abby is afraid going to the police will backfire, alert Jerry that she's here. Without something concrete, I'm not sure what the chief can do to help us. I'm hopeful I can find a way to bridge the gap, maybe locate Jerry, or at least offer the chief some possible suspects. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I can't come up with any better ideas. That's why I'm telling you. If I'm missing something, I'm certainly willing to listen. Seth stared into the fire for a few seconds before saying, I understand Abby's concerns, but if this man is really dangerous, it is the job of the police to provide protection. It seems to me that you are stepping into an area that you are not trained to handle properly. But Dade, Levi said, if Cheryl does not have enough to give the police yet, perhaps it is wise to wait a bit. If I could even figure out if he's still in town, Cheryl said, maybe it will help. Abby can't look for him, but I can. If he's gone, then Abby can hang around town until she feels safe enough and then go to the women's shelter for help. Hopefully one that Jerry has already checked out. All she needs is to get him out of her life so she can begin to put her life back together. Seth shook his head. I am hearing words like hopefully and maybe. It seems to me that this situation needs to be solved permanently. Abby cannot spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Cheryl considered Seth's words. You're right, she said finally. This needs to come to an end. But how do we make that happen? How can we make that happen? I am not sure that we can do this, Abby. Abby will have to make some decisions to stop her husband's abuse, and hiding will not accomplish that. I'm not so sure he'll stay hidden much longer, Levi said. Someone in the church has already noticed that Abby is not who she seems to be. You are speaking of the note found in your Bible, Seth asked. Yes, Levi acknowledged. She's not leaving Rachel's at all now, Cheryl said. No one else will become suspicious. Husband, Abby cannot reveal herself now, Naomi said quietly. This man is too dangerous. And I agree, Seth said, taking his wife's hand. But my point is that he must be stopped here. This situation should not follow her when it is time for her to move on. Agreed. So how do we do that? Levi asked. Seth smiled. Again, the word we. I must pray about this. Right now, I do not have the answer. I believe Cheryl is correct in saying that we must first find out if this Jerry is in town, Naomi said. If he is not, then Abby can come out of hiding. Perhaps without a climate of fear, she can begin to make some good decisions for her future. That makes sense, Cheryl said, but how do we find him? Especially with the description that we have. Without a picture, it could be really difficult. Sugar Creek is not a large town, Naomi said, and we know most of the people here. We will begin to look for men who do not belong. Then, by process of elimination, we will narrow it down. And then what, ma'am? Levi asked. Naomi took a deep breath and let it out slowly while staring at her husband. I do not have an answer for that, son. But once we know if he is here, and if so, where he is, then we will be one step closer to alerting Chief Twitchell. I do not know much about English law, but I have to wonder if this Jerry has crossed the line before. Usually men with violence in their hearts leave a path of destruction behind. Perhaps the police in Abby's hometown were not willing to pursue Jerry, but I am sure Chief Twitchell will not hesitate to take action, especially if it is clear Jerry is a dangerous man. I hadn't thought of that, Naomi, Cheryl said. But if his only crime is breaking a restraining order several years ago, he won't be held long, I'm afraid. I believe we will have to take this one step at a time, Naomi said with a sigh. First, we should try to locate this Jerry. Then we will pray that God will guide our next steps. Seth shook his head. I have heard the reasons you are concerned about approaching the police prematurely, but I am not convinced that your arguments are sound. I am not willing to have my family or my friends, he looked at Cheryl, put into harm's way. It is Tuesday, Levi said. What if we look for him until Saturday morning? At that point, we will either go to the police with something that may help bring this to a close, or we will turn the situation over to them and let the chief decide the proper course of action. Cheryl frowned. But Abby may not want us to do that. Seth leaned back on the couch and stared at her. And perhaps it must be her choice in the end, but I will not allow my wife or my daughter to be put into dangerous situation. If you do not find this man, or if you do not contact the police by the end of the week, Naomi and Esther will not be allowed in your store again, or at least until the situation is resolved. I will bring in the items we sell and dismiss. He looked at Cheryl through narrowed eyes. I am sorry, Cheryl, but this is my decision. It is not one made in haste, and it is not made with ill will toward you. I am very happy for our relationship, but it is my job as leader of my family to protect them, and I take that responsibility very seriously. Naomi and Cheryl looked at each other. Cheryl could see the distress on Naomi's face. She understood Seth's point of view, but she didn't want to lose Naomi's friendship. I do not mean to sound harsh, Seth said gently, but this is my conclusion. It is not open for discussion. I understand, Cheryl said with a sigh. That leaves me 3 days to figure out who Jerry Harper is. No, that gives us 3 days to figure out who he is, Naomi said. I will not have you directly involved in this, wife, Seth said sharply. Cheryl is new in town, husband. She cannot find this man without assistance. I will simply help her to narrow down her suspects, but I will not put myself in harm's way. And I will help too, Levi said. I can keep an eye on Ma'am and Cheryl. This guy will not bother them if I am near. And what about your chores? Seth shot back. The farm cannot run without you. Eli will help me, and Elizabeth can take care of the maize for a few days. She did it when Eli had the flu. He swung his gaze to Cheryl. I will not be able to stay in your shop all day. It is true that there are some chores that I must do, but I will be able to help you as much as I can. Seth sighed. I believe your mother has been reading some of your sister's books. A few of them talk about mysteries and detectives. Your man must believe she is some kind of a sleuth. Levi laughed out loud. Sleuth, ma'am? Naomi threw her shoulders back and glared at her son. Your mother was smart enough to raise you, yeah? Perhaps she is wise enough to help her friend uncover the truth and assist a woman in distress. The smile immediately slipped from Levi's face. I'm sorry, ma'am. I did not mean to imply that I am only capable of making jams and jellies, she sniffed and then winked at Cheryl's. No worries, my friend. We will solve this mystery together. Amused by the fire in her Amish friend, Cheryl grinned at her. Together, she echoed. Seth shook his head. I am not sure this is a good idea, but I will allow my wife and son to see what they can do to help you, as long as they are not put in any dangerous situations. However, you must take my warning seriously, Cheryl. My God-given duty is to take care of this family. He stood to his feet and held the note out toward her. Cheryl stood up and walked over to him, taking the note from his hand. I understand. Thank you for your willingness to help me. We will be very careful. I won't allow anyone to be put into a precarious situation. I know your intentions are good, Seth said, but I am not convinced you will be able to control every circumstance. You have until Sunday to find the answers you seek. A short time later, Cheryl drove away from the Miller's farm with a jug of apple cider, a piece of caramel pie, and a feeling of gratefulness due to their support and friendship. However, she couldn't help but wonder if there had ever been an odder group of detectives, a single shopkeeper and an Amish, mother and son. And that's the end of chapter 8. I am going to go now and find a recipe for caramel pie, and it will be posted on our Facebook page. Enjoy the rain. Take care.